The morning sun glinted off the glass towers of New Seoul Spaceport. Docking bays hummed with activity as ships from a dozen worlds came and went. Among the many buildings that made up this hub of interstellar commerce, the Galactic Court of Appeals stood out with its circular design and shimmering force field. Judge Nara Kim walked toward the courthouse, her simple black coat buttoned against the cool morning air. She carried a small bag that held her lunch and a few personal items. Unlike other judges who arrived with escorts, Judge Kim preferred to walk alone. It helped her think. Humans show such resilience, she thought as she passed a group of tall, blue-skinned aliens from the Oros system. The aliens towered over her, their four eyes blinking in patterns that showed respect. They recognized her even in plain clothes. Judge Kim was one of only 3 human judges in the Galactic Court. 10 years ago, humans had just joined the Galactic Alliance. Many alien species still doubted whether humans belonged. But judges like Nara Kim were changing that view, one case at a time. She reached the side entrance of the courthouse. This door was for staff only. Judge Kim used it every day to avoid the crowds at the main entrance. She placed her hand on the scanner and waited for the green light. "Stop right there," a stern voice called out. Judge Kim turned to see a human man in the black uniform of the Colonial Security Force. His badge read Officer Da Park. His face was hard, and his eyes looked tired. The patch on his shoulder showed he had served for 20 years. "This entrance is for authorized court personnel only," Officer Park said. He moved his hand to rest on his stun baton. Judge Kim smiled politely. "I am Judge Nara Kim. I preside over Courtroom 3. Officer Park frowned. "Do you have identification?" Judge Kim reached into her pocket and pulled out her judicial ID card. The holographic seal of the Galactic Alliance spun above it, marking it as genuine. She held it out for Officer Park to see. Officer Park barely glanced at the ID. "This doesn't look right. Anyone could make a fake like this." Judge Kim's smile faded. "Officer Park, I've been a judge in this court for 6 years. My chambers are just down the hall, if you call." "Ma'am, I've been assigned to this court for the first time today, and I haven't been briefed on all personnel," Officer Park cut in. "But I know that judges don't sneak in through side doors. They come through the main entrance with proper escorts." Judge Kim took a deep breath. She had faced this kind of treatment before. As one of the few human judges, and a woman with dark skin, some people made quick judgments about her. "Officer, I understand your concern for security, but I assure you, I am Judge Nara Kim. If you check the staff directory." "Ma'am, I need you to step away from this entrance," Officer Park interrupted again. His voice grew louder. "Please use the public entrance if you have legitimate business in the court." A small crowd began to gather. Aliens from several worlds watched with interest. A tall, green-skinned clerk from the Vex system recognized Judge Kim and hurried over. "Officer, this is indeed Judge Kim," the clerk said, his translated voice coming through the small device at his throat. Officer Park shook his head. "Sir, please step back. I'm handling this situation." Judge Kim remained calm. "Officer Park, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Perhaps we could speak with Chief Security Officer Min." "There's no misunderstanding," Officer Park said firmly. "You're attempting to enter a restricted area without proper clearance." 2 more court employees approached, both pointing at Judge Kim and trying to explain. Officer Park ignored them. His face reddened as the crowd grew. "That's enough," Officer Park declared. "Ma'am, you need to leave now, or I will remove you." Judge Kim stood her ground. "Officer, I am Judge Nara Kim of the Galactic Court of Appeals. I have every right to." Officer Park grabbed Judge Kim's arm. The crowd gasped. In the Galactic Alliance, touching a judge without permission was considered deeply disrespectful. "Officer, unhand me immediately," Judge Kim said, her voice now cold and clear. Officer Park didn't listen. With a firm grip on her arm, he began pulling her away from the door. "Ma'am, you're causing a disturbance. I need you to come with me." The green-skinned clerk tried once more. "Officer Park, this is a terrible mistake. This is Judge Kim." Judge Kim didn't resist as Officer Park pulled her across the plaza. She kept her head high, though her cheeks burned with humiliation. The growing crowd of aliens watched in shock. Some recorded the scene with their devices. A tall, four-armed security chief came running from the main entrance. "Park, what are you doing?" he shouted. Officer Park turned. "Removing an unauthorized person from a restricted entrance, sir." The security chief's face paled. "That's Judge Kim, you fool. Release her at once." Officer Park's grip loosened slightly, but doubt still showed on his face. "Sir, she doesn't look like." "Like what, Officer Park?" The chief snapped. "Like a judge. Judge Kim has served on this court with distinction for 6 years." Finally, Officer Park let go of Judge Kim's arm. His face showed the first hint of uncertainty. The security chief bowed deeply to Judge Kim. "Your Honor, I cannot begin to apologize for this outrage. Officer Park was just transferred from the outer colonies yesterday. This is his first day." Judge Kim straightened her coat. The crowd around them had grown to more than 50 beings from a dozen worlds. Many looked confused or concerned. Some of the alien diplomats were speaking rapidly into communication devices. "Chief," Judge Kim said calmly, "please escort me to my chambers. I have a case beginning in 30 minutes. As they walked away, Officer Park stood frozen, the color draining from his face as he began to realize his terrible mistake. In her chambers, Judge Kim sat at her desk, hands slightly shaking. She took several deep breaths to calm herself. Her assistant, a young human woman named Tai, rushed in with a cup of tea. "Judge Kim, everyone is talking about what happened," Ta said, setting down the tea. "Are you all right?" Judge Kim nodded slowly. "I'm fine, Ta. But Officer Park has created quite a situation." Tai's eyes were wide. "The alien representatives are in an uproar. The Zrith ambassador is saying this shows humans don't respect their own judicial system." Judge Kim sipped her tea. "And what do you think, Ta?" "I think Officer Park should be fired immediately," Ta said with passion. Judge Kim set down her cup. "And would that solve the larger problem?" Ta hesitated. "What do you mean, Your Honor?" Officer Park acted on his assumptions. He saw a human woman who didn't match his idea of what a judge should look like. Judge Kim stood and walked to where her judicial robes hung. "The question is, how do we change those assumptions?" She reached for her robes, the black fabric shimmering with the embedded technology that marked her status. As she put them on, her posture straightened. The robe's collar lit up with the symbols of her judicial rank. "Ta, please inform the court officers that before we begin today's case, we will address a matter of contempt of court." Judge Kim's voice was steady now. "And have Officer Park brought to the courtroom." "Yes, Your Honor," Ta said, hurrying out. Judge Kim looked at her reflection in the window. The morning sun caught the golden emblems on her robe's shoulders, symbols of justice that were recognized across the galaxy. She thought about what would happen next. This wasn't just about one officer's mistake or her personal humiliation. This was about humanity's place in the galaxy, about whether humans could show the same justice and fairness to each other that they promised to alien species. In 10 minutes, she would enter her courtroom. All eyes would be on her, human and alien alike. What she did next would say much about human justice. Judge Kim squared her shoulders. She was ready. The main courtroom of the New Seoul Spaceport Galactic Court of Appeals filled quickly. News of the incident had spread through the spaceport like wildfire. Beings from a dozen different worlds packed the public seating area. Their bodies came in many shapes and sizes, some with multiple arms, others with scaled skin that changed colors with their moods. At the front of the room, representatives from the trade dispute case waited nervously. The Merchants Guild from Proxima Centauri sat on one side, their pale blue skin making them easy to spot. On the other side sat the Mining Consortium from Rigel, their heavy bodies covered in protective suits that hummed softly. Assistant Ta stood by the door to the judge's chambers, her back straight and her face serious. She checked the time, 1 minute before the session would begin. In the back of the courtroom, Officer Dai Park stood between two court security officers. His face was pale. His hand shook slightly as he straightened his uniform. The security chief had explained to him just how badly he had erred. A judge is sacred in the Galactic Alliance. The chief had told him. To put your hands on one is worse than insulting a planetary leader. Some species consider it a form of blasphemy. Officer Park swallowed hard. After 20 years in the outer colonies, dealing mostly with pirates and smugglers, he had been unprepared for the complex protocol of the Central Worlds. But that was no excuse, and he knew it. The court recorder, a small robot that floated in the air, suddenly chimed 3 times. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Nara Kim," Tai announced in a clear voice. Everyone in the courtroom stood. The aliens from worlds with different customs were helped by human guides who showed them the proper way to show respect. The door to the judge's chambers opened. Judge Kim walked out, her black robes now fully activated. Thin lines of golden light ran along the edges, and the symbols of justice glowed on her shoulders. Her face was calm and composed as she took her place at the high bench. "You may be seated," she said. The crowd settled back into their seats, a rustle of movement, and the soft clicks of translator devices filling the air. Judge Kim looked out at the crowded courtroom. She could see the tension in the room, the expectation. Many eyes were fixed on Officer Park at the back. "Before we proceed with today's scheduled case between the Merchants Guild and the Mining Consortium, we must address a serious matter," Judge Kim said. Her voice was steady and clear. "This court represents the justice system of the Galactic Alliance. It stands as a symbol of our shared values across many worlds and species." The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the usual hum of the environmental systems seemed to fade away. "Earlier today, there was an incident that challenges those values," Judge Kim continued. "Officer Da Park, please step forward." The 2 security officers guided Officer Park to the center of the courtroom. He walked stiffly, his eyes fixed on the floor. Judge Kim looked directly at him. "Officer Park, you are charged with contempt of court, interference with a judicial officer, and conduct unbecoming of a Colonial Security Force officer. These are serious charges that could result in the termination of your service and possible criminal penalties." A murmur went through the crowd. Some of the alien observers clicked or hummed in their native languages, expressions of surprise or approval. "Do you understand the charges, Officer Park?" Judge Kim asked. Officer Park raised his head finally. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice barely audible. "Speak up, officer," Judge Kim said firmly. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand," Officer Park said more clearly. Judge Kim nodded. "Now, I will hear your explanation of your actions this morning." Officer Park took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I have no excuse for my behavior. I was wrong. I acted on assumptions that I should not have made. I failed in my duty as an officer." The courtroom remained silent, waiting. "I spent the last 15 years in the outer colonies," Officer Park continued. "I was transferred here just yesterday. But that's not an excuse. I should have checked your identification properly. I should have listened to the staff who tried to tell me who you were. I was arrogant and wrong." Judge Kim listened without expression. When Officer Park finished, she looked around the courtroom. "The Colonial Security Force exists to protect all citizens of the Alliance, regardless of species, planet of origin, or appearance," she said. "When an officer fails in that duty, it damages trust in our entire system of justice." She paused, letting her words sink in. "However," she continued, "justice is not about punishment alone. It is about correction and improvement." Judge Kim turned her gaze back to Officer Park. "Officer Park, do you believe you can learn from this mistake?" Officer Park's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." "And if given the chance, would you work to correct the assumptions that led to your actions today?" "Yes, Your Honor." Without question. Judge Kim nodded. Then I will render my decision. The tension in the room grew. Many of the alien observers leaned forward in their seats. Officer Da Park, you are found in contempt of court, Judge Kim declared. You will be placed under judicial custody for 72 hours. During that time, you will not be permitted to perform your regular duties. Officer Park's shoulders slumped slightly. However, Judge Kim continued, instead of standard detention, you will spend those 72 hours in the Cultural Exchange Program at the Spaceport Academy. There, you will learn about the judicial customs of all major Alliance species. You will study the history of human integration into the Galactic Alliance, with special focus on the challenges faced by those who do not match the expected image of their roles. Murmurs spread through the courtroom again. This was not the harsh punishment many had expected. Following those 72 hours, you will be assigned to court duty for 3 months, where you will assist all judges of this court, regardless of their species or appearance. Judge Kim continued. You will file daily reports on what you have learned and how you have applied those lessons. She looked directly at Officer Park again. Do you accept this judgment, Officer Park? Officer Park stood straighter. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for the opportunity to learn and improve. Judge Kim nodded. The security chief will escort you to the academy now. Your program begins immediately. As Officer Park was led away, Judge Kim addressed the courtroom once more. To our visitors from other worlds, I want to say this. Humanity is still growing, still learning. We make mistakes, but our strength lies not in being perfect, but in our willingness to acknowledge our errors and work to correct them. The green-skinned clerk who had tried to help earlier nodded in approval. Now, Judge Kim said, her tone shifting to a more businesslike one, we will proceed with the scheduled case. Representatives of the Merchants Guild and Mining Consortium, please come forward. As the trade dispute representatives approached the bench, the crowd began to talk quietly among themselves. The alien observers seemed particularly animated in their discussions. Tad leaned close to one of the court reporters. What are they saying? She whispered. The reporter, who understood several alien languages, smiled. The Regellian ambassador just said that he's never seen justice so eloquently balanced between accountability and compassion. He's impressed. Ta glanced at Judge Kim, who was now reviewing documents for the trade case. She just showed them who humans really are, Ta said proudly. And who is that? The reporter asked. Tai watched as Judge Kim began addressing the complex trade dispute with the same calm authority she had shown in handling Officer Park's case. We're the species that doesn't claim to be perfect, Ta said softly. We're the ones who know how to learn from our mistakes. At his desk, the Regellian ambassador activated his personal recorder. Note for the council report, he dictated quietly. Perhaps we have underestimated the humans after all. 3 days passed quickly. Officer Da Park spent every waking hour at the Spaceport Academy's Cultural Exchange Program. He sat in classes with new recruits and visiting aliens. He watched videos about the history of the Galactic Alliance. He practiced proper greetings for 20 different species. Most importantly, he learned about human diversity and the struggles many humans faced even after joining the stars. On the morning of the 4th day, Officer Park stood outside the Colonial Fleet headquarters. The tall building gleamed in the morning light. Ships passed overhead, their engines humming. Park straightened his uniform and took a deep breath. Today was his disciplinary tribunal. Today he would learn if he still had a career. Inside the building, a large room had been prepared. 3 high-ranking officers sat at a long table. In the center was Admiral Jin Yoon, his gray hair cut short and his uniform decorated with medals from 30 years of service. To his left sat Captain Hannah Lee, head of personnel. To his right was Commander Quan Bok, chief of colonial security training. The room filled with observers. Some were Park's fellow officers. Others were alien representatives, curious to see how humans handled internal matters of justice. In the front row sat Judge Nara Kim, her face calm and unreadable. Officer Park was led to a small table facing the tribunal. Beside him sat his appointed counsel, Captain Sun Cho, a serious woman with short black hair and kind eyes. "All rise," announced a voice. The room stood as Admiral Yoon and the other officers entered. "Be seated," Admiral Yoon said after taking his place. "This tribunal is now in session. We are here to review the conduct of Officer Park and to determine appropriate disciplinary action." Admiral Yoon looked directly at Park. "Officer Park, you have been charged with contempt of court, interference with a judicial officer, and conduct unbecoming of a colonial security force officer. How do you plead?" Park stood straight. "Guilty on all charges, sir." A murmur ran through the room. Most officers facing such serious charges would try to defend themselves or reduce the charges. Admiral Yoon raised an eyebrow. "Very well. Senior Advocate Hyun Lee will present the case for the prosecution." A tall man in the dark uniform of the legal division stood. "Thank you, Admiral. The facts of this case are not in dispute. 3 days ago, Officer Park physically removed Judge Nara Kim from the Galactic Court of Appeals building, despite her identifying herself as a judge. This action violated multiple regulations and caused a diplomatic incident with our alien allies. Advocate Lee walked slowly in front of the tribunal. "But this case is about more than one officer's mistake. It is about the image of humanity that we present to the galaxy. For too long, many alien species have questioned whether humans possess the temperament to join galactic society. They point to our history of conflict, our divisions based on appearance or origin." He turned to look at Officer Park. Officer Park's actions confirmed their worst suspicions about us. He saw a human who didn't match his idea of what a judge should look like, and he acted with prejudice rather than professionalism. Advocate Lee's voice grew stronger. "The Colonial Security Force cannot tolerate such behavior. Officer Park has served for 20 years, but that experience makes his actions worse, not better. He should have known to verify Judge Kim's identity properly. He should have listened when others tried to correct him. Instead, his arrogance and prejudice led to a public humiliation of a respected judge." Advocate Lee returned to his seat. "The prosecution recommends immediate termination of Officer Park's service and a public apology to Judge Kim and the Galactic Alliance." Admiral Yoon nodded. "Thank you, Advocate Lee. Captain Sun Cho, you may present the defense." Captain Cho stood and smoothed her uniform. "Thank you, Admiral. The defense does not dispute the facts of this case. Officer Park made a serious error in judgment that cannot be excused." She walked to stand beside Officer Park. "However, we ask the tribunal to consider the context of his actions. Officer Park spent 15 years serving in the outer colonies, where contact with the central worlds was limited. He protected human settlements from raiders and smugglers, often at great personal risk. He received 3 commendations for bravery." Captain Cho picked up a datapad. His personnel file shows a dedicated officer with no previous disciplinary issues. What it also shows is a man who had minimal cultural integration training. The colonial fleet assigned him to increasingly isolated posts, where he interacted primarily with other human officers. When he was suddenly transferred to New Seoul Spaceport, he received no updated training on diplomatic protocol or judicial recognition. She set down the pad. "This does not excuse his actions, but it helps explain them. Officer Park's failure was real, but it was also a failure of our system to properly prepare our officers for service in diverse environments." Captain Cho looked at the alien observers. "We humans are still learning how to be good citizens of the galaxy. Officer Park is ready to learn from his mistake. He has already completed the initial cultural exchange program and has expressed sincere remorse for his actions." She returned to her seat. "The defense asks for a punishment that allows Officer Park to make amends through service rather than ending his career." Admiral Yoon nodded. "Thank you, Captain Cho. The tribunal will now hear from witnesses. We call Judge Nara Kim to testify." The room grew still as Judge Kim rose and walked to the witness stand. After taking the oath, she sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap. Advocate Lee approached. "Judge Kim, Please describe the incident in your own words. Judge Kim spoke clearly, describing exactly what had happened without emotion or exaggeration. When she finished, Advocate Lee had only one question. Judge Kim, in your opinion, what disciplinary action should be taken against Officer Park? A hush fell over the room. Everyone expected Judge Kim to call for severe punishment. Judge Kim looked directly at Officer Park. In my courtroom, I often see beings from many worlds who have broken laws they didn't fully understand. I must consider not only the offense, but also the opportunity for growth. She turned to face the tribunal. Officer Park's actions were wrong and cannot be excused. However, I believe his greatest value to the colonial fleet and to humanity is not as an example of punishment, but as an example of growth. Judge Kim's voice remained calm, but grew stronger. I recommend that Officer Park receive formal disciplinary action that remains in his record. But I also recommend that he be reassigned to the Cultural Integration Division, where his experience can help other officers avoid similar mistakes. Advocate Lee looked surprised. You are asking for leniency, Your Honor. Judge Kim shook her head slightly. I am asking for wisdom, Advocate. Humanity's place in the galaxy depends not on our ability to punish our own, but on our ability to learn and grow. Our alien allies do not expect us to be perfect. They watch to see how we handle our imperfections. She glanced at the alien observers. Many species in the Galactic Alliance have rigid systems of justice. Once an individual breaks a rule, they are permanently marked as defective. Humans have a different approach. We believe in redemption, in second chances. Judge Kim stood. That belief, that anyone can learn and improve, is perhaps our greatest contribution to galactic society. As Judge Kim returned to her seat, the room remained silent. The alien observers leaned together, speaking in hushed tones. Some nodded their long heads or blinked their multiple eyes in what seemed like approval. Admiral Yoon cleared his throat. Thank you, Judge Kim. The tribunal will now consider all testimony before rendering judgment. We will reconvene in 1 hour. As the tribunal members left, Officer Park turned to look at Judge Kim. Their eyes met briefly. Park bowed his head in a gesture of deep respect. Judge Kim acknowledged him with a small nod. In that simple exchange, something important passed between them. Something the watching aliens noted with great interest. The hour passed slowly. Officer Park sat quietly in a small waiting room. His hands rested on his knees. His face showed the strain of the past few days. Captain Sun Cho sat beside him, reviewing notes on her datapad. What do you think will happen? Park asked finally. Captain Cho looked up. Judge Kim's testimony may have helped you, but the tribunal will make its own decision. Park nodded. I deserve whatever punishment they give me. Perhaps, Captain Cho said. But punishment is not always the same as justice. A soft chime sounded. It was time to return to the tribunal room. The room had filled even more during the break. Word had spread about Judge Kim's surprising testimony. Now more alien observers lined the walls, their various forms creating a colorful backdrop to the proceedings. Officer Park took his place at the table. The room fell silent as Admiral Yoon and the other tribunal members entered. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, this tribunal is ready to announce its decision, Admiral Yoon said. His voice was firm but not harsh. All eyes fixed on the Admiral as he continued. Officer Park, you have served the colonial fleet for 20 years. Your record shows bravery and dedication. However, your actions 3 days ago were unacceptable and caused harm to both Judge Kim and to humanity's standing in the Galactic Alliance. Admiral Yoon looked directly at Park. This tribunal finds you guilty of all charges. Your punishment is as follows. The room grew completely still. First, you are suspended from active duty for 30 days. This suspension will be noted in your permanent record. Park's shoulders tensed, but he kept his face calm. Second, following your suspension, you will be reassigned to the Cultural Integration Division. There, you will help develop new training protocols for officers transitioning from the outer colonies to central worlds. Park's eyes widened slightly. This was not the career-ending punishment many had expected. Third, Admiral Hume continued, you will work directly with the Judicial Recognition Committee to improve security procedures at all Galactic Alliance courts. Your experience, both your years of service and your recent error, will provide valuable insight. Admiral Hume's expression softened slightly. The tribunal believes that your greatest value to the colonial fleet now lies in helping others avoid similar mistakes. Your experience can be transformed from a failure into a teaching tool. He looked around the room, making eye contact with some of the alien observers. In the colonial fleet, we believe that one mistake does not define a person's entire career. We believe in learning and growth, and in second chances. Admiral Hume straightened. Officer Park, do you accept this judgment? Park stood tall. Yes, Admiral. Thank you for the opportunity to make amends. Then this tribunal is adjourned. As the crowd began to disperse, Judge Kim approached Officer Park. The room grew quiet again as people watched this meeting. Officer Park, Judge Kim said, her voice clear but not unkind. Park turned to face her. He bowed deeply, a sign of profound respect in both Earth and many alien cultures. Your Honor, I cannot properly express my regret for my actions. Thank you for your mercy. Judge Kim shook her head slightly. Not mercy, Officer Park. Justice. True justice looks forward, not just backward. She extended her hand. After a moment of surprise, Park shook it. I look forward to seeing your contributions to the Cultural Integration Division, Judge Kim said. Perhaps you could visit my courtroom in a few months to speak with my staff about the new recognition protocols. Park nodded, his face showing both relief and determination. It would be my honor, Judge Kim. As they parted, the alien observers buzzed with conversation. The Regelian ambassador approached Admiral Hume. A most interesting resolution, the ambassador said, his translated voice slightly mechanical. On my world, such an offense would result in permanent removal from service. Admiral Hume smiled slightly. Different approaches to justice, Ambassador. We humans have found that people often give their best service after learning from a significant mistake. The ambassador's environmental suit hummed as he considered this. The Galactic Council will find this case study fascinating. It may change some perspectives on humanity's application for full membership. 6 months passed. New Sol Spaceport grew busier as trade expanded between Earth and the outer systems. The Galactic Court of Appeals added 2 new courtrooms to handle the increasing number of cases. In her office, Judge Nara Kim reviewed reports on her datapad. A small chime sounded at her door. Enter, she called. Tai opened the door. Your Honor, Officer Park is here with the security team. The new identification system is ready for demonstration. Judge Kim nodded. Send them in. Officer Park entered, followed by 3 technicians. He looked different now, more confident but also more thoughtful. His uniform bore the insignia of the Cultural Integration Division. Judge Kim, he said with a respectful bow. Thank you for allowing us to present the new system. Please proceed, Officer Park. Park gestured to the technicians, who set up a small device on Judge Kim's desk. The new judicial recognition system connects to the central database, Park explained. It identifies all court officials regardless of what they're wearing or which entrance they use. It's been programmed to recognize officials from all 47 species in the Alliance. He demonstrated how the system worked, showing how it could identify Judge Kim from any angle, even in civilian clothes. Most importantly, Park continued, the system is backed by new training protocols. All security officers now receive extensive cultural awareness education before assignment to any courthouse. They learn the appearance and customs of all major species, with special emphasis on looking beyond their own expectations. Judge Kim nodded approvingly. Impressive work, Officer Park. How has the system been received so far? Very well, Your Honor. It's already been adopted by 12 spaceports across the Alliance. The Galactic Council has recommended it for all judicial buildings. After the demonstration, the technicians packed up their equipment and left. Officer Park remained behind at Judge Kim's request. "Officer Park," she said when they were alone, "I received a copy of your latest report to the Cultural Integration Division. Your work these past months has been exemplary." Park nodded his thanks. "The experience has changed me, Your Honor. I see things differently now." "That is the best outcome we could have hoped for," Judge Kim said. "I've also received news from the Galactic Council that may interest you." She picked up a data pad and handed it to him. "This arrived this morning." Park read the screen, his eyes widening. "The Council has approved humanity's application for full membership, after just 50 years of provisional status." Judge Kim nodded. "The Council cited several factors in their decision. One was our judicial system's ability to balance accountability with growth opportunities. They specifically mentioned your case as an example." Park looked stunned. "My case? But I failed. I made a terrible mistake." "Yes," Judge Kim agreed. "And then our system responded not by discarding you, but by helping you grow from that mistake." The Council found that approach intriguing. Many species in the Alliance have justice systems that are rigid and unforgiving. Ours offers something different. She took back the data pad. "The official announcement will come next week. Earth will send representatives to the Council chamber for the formal ceremony." Officer Park stood a little straighter. "Congratulations, Your Honor. This is a historic moment for humanity." "It is," Judge Kim agreed. "And it's a reminder that our greatest strength as a species isn't that we never make mistakes. It's that we learn from them," Park finished. Judge Kim smiled. "Exactly." As Officer Park left her office, Judge Kim turned to look out her window at the busy spaceport below. Ships from dozens of worlds arrived and departed in a carefully choreographed dance. Soon, Earth ships would fly as equals among them, no longer marked with the yellow bands of provisional status. The path had not been easy. Humanity had faced prejudice, mistrust, and doubt from many alien species. But slowly, through cases large and small, they had shown the galaxy who they truly were, not a perfect species, but one with a unique gift for growth and change. And in the vast expanse of the galaxy, that gift was proving to be more valuable than perfection could ever be.